Yeah, absolutely. No, I'm fine with an intimate gathering. We can wait for some other folks to trickle in and see what we get. But I mean, since we have a more intimate group here, does it make sense to do a quick round of hellos and introductions?
Sure. This is your space, so I think that would be fine with a group this size.
Well, we'll do it with the group here that is on time and ready to go. So, welcome everyone. My name is Tom Durr. I'm the program coordinator for the 1,000 Landscapes for 1 Billion People initiative, which is what this session is primarily about. So, I am an employee for an organization called Eco Agriculture Partners, which has kind of been a leading organization in the space of integrated landscape management approaches for 20 years. And we've really been operating kind of in this think tanky space for our early history. And now we're, in the last several years, really, we've been pivoting more towards action. And 1,000 Landscapes is our latest and greatest attempt to scale up integrated landscape management approaches. We use that term very broadly. Bioregionalism is also fine. Watershed management, the full return splat like sort of approach. If you're familiar with common land, we're very inclusive about the approaches we use. So yeah, my name again is Tom. I'm based in Boulder, Colorado. I'll dive into a little bit of a PowerPoint before we get into some more hopefully very rich discussion. This is really just kind of an introductory session to 1,000 Landscapes that I hope will generate a lot of interest among some of the participants. So yeah, with that, I'd love to just hear a little bit more about everyone here in this group. So I'll just call out some names. So Robert, it'd be great if you could introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Rob Thayer. I'm the founder of the landscape architecture program at UC Davis in California. I've been a bioregionalist since 1987, and I wrote a book in 2003 called Life, Place, Bioregional Thought and Practice. And I've contributed to a bunch of other publications, including a book called Bioregional Planning and Design, which was coordinated out of University of Florence. And I've been involved in a bunch of watershed and bioregional organizations in my home region, which is the Sacramento Valley bioregion of California. And I just copied your wonderful thing down.
Oh, great. It needs updating, but I'm glad you got it.
Couldn't get my printer. I'm a Luddite, and it's really hard. I had to beat the printer over the head to get it to print out. Okay, that's enough of me.
No worries. Thanks. I see we got some more people trickling in here, so we'll try to be quick with intros. If you can just say your name, where you're based, your organization, that would be fantastic. I'll hand it over to Paul real quick. Sorry, Paul, you're muted.
Yeah, fundamental. So hi, I'm in the west of England in a bioregion we call the River Avon bioregion. I work with a number of businesses, but also a local community in my home city. I'm in the process of developing with the group a story of place for the city within its bioregion. And I think that the question I guess I'm holding is, what can I learn about the desire, there is a desire also in the group, but also perhaps also more widely about the story of the bioregion itself. Do people have experience of designing, of divining stories of place at landscape scale so as to be able to, motivate a deeper sense of belonging?
Excellent. Yeah. And we have more people here now than we did a few moments ago, so I apologize. We'll hold off on introductions, but please, I would really appreciate it if you can, in the chat, put your name, where you're based, and also your organization or who you're partnering with, and any other relevant information that you'd like to share. Any questions would be great. I'll dive into a presentation right now that I'll try to keep to 10 or 15 minutes, and you can always, don't hesitate to raise your hand or just interrupt me. I'm fine with that as well, and ask any questions. That's perfectly fine. So I'm going to share my screen here. Is that visible to everyone?
Yeah.
Okay, excellent. So For those of you just trickling in right now, again, my name is Tom Durham, the program coordinator for the 1,000 Landscapes for 1 Billion People initiative, which is co-convened by Rainforest Alliance and Eco Agriculture Partners. I work for Eco Ag, the later, and we work with dozens of other partners that I'll get into in a little bit. But this session today is really focused on the overlap and synergies between integrated landscape management as a tool for bioregionalism, and landscape approaches broadly, how they overlap with bioregionalism. And then most importantly, I want this session to give everyone here kind of a better idea about what we're trying to do as the 1000L initiative, reveal pathways for collaboration. We are explicitly an initiative, a multi-partner initiative that believes in radical collaboration. If I've just linked the website in the chat, but we're figuring out kind of building the plane as we fly it, what we mean by radical collaboration in this emerging space. So really excited to have you all here today. Thanks for joining. But as just for some quick overview here, as our name suggests, 1,000 Landscapes for 1 Billion People is really trying to support and work directly with what we call landscape partnerships. And the goal is by 2030, in some way or another, we're supporting landscape partnerships, these multi-stakeholder coalitions that work at the jurisdictional, territorial, bioregion, landscape, watershed level to advance the goals that they have as they define them. So those are often aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals, but really it's meeting these intersecting mosaics of challenges around food, water insecurity, biodiversity, poverty, land degradation, education, a whole suite of things. And we really leave it to the landscape partnerships, these multi-stakeholder coalitions themselves, to define what those goals and priorities are. Where we try to be as unprescriptive as possible. We try to move away from mandates. And for that reason, we work in radical collaboration with a whole suite of partners. So this is our coalition of sort of formalized organizations that we work with. This isn't actually quite everyone. You'll see that the 7 organizations at the top here: Eco Ag, Rainforest Alliance, Common Land, Conservation International, the Landscape Finance Lab, Tech Matters, which is a tech for good nonprofit based in Silicon Valley that I'll talk a little bit more about later, and UNDP. These 7 partners are the core stewards of the initiative. They sit in the governance of the initiative. They lead a lot of the different work streams we focus on, but really we're much larger than that. We work with dozens of what we call technical partners, which are these organizations below those 7 partners on the top there. And these are organizations big and small. We have major organizations on here like WRI and SNV. We have much more locally based civil society organizations. And we're always trying to form new partnerships with people all the time. What's far more important in the stage we're in right now with 1,000 Landscapes isn't just the organizations we're working with, but actually, to skip ahead here, is the landscape partnerships themselves that we're working with. So you can think about these landscape partnerships here as bioregions. But these are globally the different places around the world where we're partnering with local communities, local landscape partnerships, these multi-stakeholder coalitions, and we're actually co-designing and testing tools and services with them. So how this process usually works is we'll go to, we'll connect with a partner in Colombia. The Sacred Sierra landscape in Colombia is a fantastic landscape that I can use as an example. High mountain landscape, coffee producing landscape, right on the coastline as well. Major indigenous community that's come together around this idea of how a coffee cooperative can actually scale up to be more of an integrated sort of landscape approach for what they're doing to actually see the benefits that they have within their landscape, have returns in value for them, which necessarily requires that they have better governance support, that they have the right flow of funding and financing. That's not just pushing funding into siloed sectoral project by project short-term things, but rather investing in a long-term generational scale integrated landscape investment portfolio, things like that. And so we work with these landscape partnerships all over the world in the phase we're in right now to actually design the tools and services that we want, that they need to support them. So to backtrack a little bit here, integrated landscape management, sorry, this is our shared vision that we have as a collection of partners for 1000 Landscapes. And I apologize for the lengthy text here, but really what we focus on, again, is the landscape partnership themselves. You can think of this as also as a bioregional partnership or a watershed coalition. But the key thing here is that there's stakeholders from across the landscape coming together. And that stakeholder group has a certain level of commitment to work together for the long term, a generational 20-year plus vision, where they're thinking about certain goals to develop a joint action plan collaboratively within the appropriate scale as defined by them. So the question we often get is what is a landscape? And I kind of alluded to this early on, is for us, a landscape or a bioregion is defined by the local multi-stakeholder partnership. We're not prescriptive. We don't mandate what the appropriate size based on hectares or jurisdictional boundaries makes up a landscape. We leave that to the local communities to decide for themselves. And so we get quite a drastic array of different landscape partnerships that we're working with in this stage right now. Some are more jurisdictional in nature. For example, we're working with a landscape partnership in Kenya that is a jurisdictional county-led landscape, has really clear jurisdictional government defined boundaries. But within that jurisdictional landscape, we're actually working with a sub-landscape within that broader landscape that is a little bit more loose and ambiguous. And that's self-defined by local communities, not the government themselves. And so we're actually seeing how we can, through these layered tiers of landscapes, bring them together to collaborate more effectively. So that is kind of what we think about for our shared vision. The how is really a key question here. And so there's been a lot of thought on this over the decades, really, about what it means to actually implement integrated landscape management. So this is, again, I apologize for the lengthy text here, but this is the loose process. It's not meant to be stepwise, but the process for integrated landscape management, which at the center here, as I keep on exaggerating, is the landscape partnership. It's really key to then seeing that these other functions that kind of make up this wheel around the landscape partnership take place in a way that ensures inclusivity, in a way that ensures that vulnerable groups and people that don't traditionally have a seat at the table are actually included in developing a shared understanding, are a part of co-creating a vision and plan, and then are jointly taking action with one another to then monitor and learn over time, over that generational time period. So 1000 Landscapes at its core is really focused on developing tools and processes around this process framework. And I'll get into a little bit more about the whole suite of tools that we're developing, but a core guidance document that we've actually recently launched is this practical guide to integrated landscape management, which you can find on the 1000L website. So this actually breaks down as concisely as we think we can each of these process elements here, and then breaks them down into further outputs for each of these elements. So in total, this practical guide has descriptions for each of those 5 elements, and then descriptions for an additional 18 outputs. That kind of, the idea here is that if you actually make progress on these 18 outputs, you're going to be in a really strong position as a landscape partnership to actually implement integrated landscape management, bioregionalism, whatever you want to refer to it as. Supplementing this practical guide is actually a tool guide, which crowdsources all of the tools that we currently find out in this space and tries to make sense of them by structuring around this process. So a key mandate of 1000 Landscapes is that we're not reinventing the wheel. We understand that there's all sorts of organizations and governments, multilaterals, businesses that are working on tools and processes to support landscape partnerships. We want to actually explicitly build those into the infrastructure and the environment that we're creating so that everyone's adding value to everyone else's work. And then we leave it to the landscape partnerships themselves to actually pick and choose what resources they find are going to be most beneficial to them. And navigating that space as it currently is as a local landscape partnership is quite complex. So a key goal of 1000 Landscapes is actually to make it much more easier to navigate this space by developing all sorts of different tools, platforms, and services and networks to make sense of it. So to get into some of the more explicit services we're developing, we work in different work streams within the initiative, and this is how they're currently categorized. So the first one I'll talk about is the Terrasso digital platform that our partner Tech Matters, who's a core partner of the initiative, is working on. And this is a platform that's, you can actually go to the Terrasso website right now. The application is actually live, though it's still in the very early days. They're going to have a more explicit launch at the earliest end of this year, possibly later on in early 2023. But the idea is that these are tools that are super user-friendly that will allow a landscape partnership or local landscape leaders to map out their landscape, to tell stories about their landscape, to collect and share data as a collection of partners. So it's meant to be sort of a landscape partnership app for managing synergies data and everything across the landscape partnership. And the idea is that this platform grows over the time. It's open source, so others can add to it. They're working with other open source applications like Kumu, for example, to actually build in those tools and add value across the whole spectrum of digital tools that are currently in this space.
Tom,
yeah, please.
Could I just pause you just for a moment? The reason I just wondered whether it's possible to invest what you're saying with also the relational work that you're doing. At the moment, you're speaking about platforms and tools and so on. And I think all of us know that working with human beings is a highly complex process which requires trust and building relationships. And you're doing amazing work, but you're not saying anything about relationships. So I just wanted to give you that chance if you wanted to take it, because it would certainly help me.
I would love to take that chance, Paul. Thanks for the prompt. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. That our theory is that for these tools to be effective and valuable requires that they're actually produced through a highly participatory and inclusive co-design phase. So I just talked about Terrasso. The way they're actually developing Terrasso is I showed this map of all the landscape partnerships we're working with. Our team that's working on Terrasso, which is a multi-organizational team in and of itself, actually on a regular basis, basically a daily basis, is having calls with local community members in these landscape partnerships to figure out what their technology needs are. So, and it's quite varied, right? So the Rupununi landscape here in Guyana, they're really interested in storytelling. So in other words, they don't actually have, they're supported by Conservation International, a major NGO, and Conservation International has helped them collect data through both qualitative and quantitative methods. They have all that data stored, but what's the point if they can't actually then produce that data and communicate it in a way that can actually attract investors, attract other partners? So Terrasso is working with them in response to that demand-driven need to actually develop digital storytelling tools. In another case, like in Lari, Kenya, which is in Kiambu County, just north of Nairobi, they have a need to actually map certain types of trees to actually monitor tree cover and regeneration, but the right type of regeneration. So, you know, there's a lot of eucalyptus plantations going up that we would recognize is not like the best form of regeneration when it comes to reforesting a landscape. And traditional monitoring tools and GIS tools don't actually have the bandwidth or the pixelation to actually distinguish between what's a eucalyptus tree and what's a native species tree. And so Terrasso is working with them to actually, based on that need, to develop the right sort of tools to respond exactly to that. So that's, you know, kind of giving you the example of what we mean by co-design is we're demand driven, we're very relationship oriented. The challenge is that, of course, we get this broad swath of different needs that landscape partnerships have. To jump back to this, so what I just described for Terrasso and how they operate is how the rest of these different design teams also operate. So The capacity strengthening, capacity development design team is actually developing a whole suite of learning modules on how to conduct integrated landscape management. It's based around those elements and outputs that I previously described. And they're working with landscape partnerships to actually figure out not just how, what content should go into these learning modules, but more importantly, how that content should be delivered. So it's easy, anyone can develop a curriculum. Not everyone can develop curriculum in a way that's going to be broadly adaptable and broadly applicable to as many global groups as possible. So all of our tools are meant to be adapted and taken, replicated, transformed, and empower local users to actually use them in the way that's most appropriate for their local context. So the model that the capacity development team is working on is actually how can we work with different training institutions at a national, regional, institutional level that can then take what we're developing and apply it to the local context that they're working in. So India is a great example where they have this whole network of training institutions based across the states and regions in India. We're going to be working with them to actually basically take our learning modules and we hope obviously transform them to a language that's understandable across the many different cultures and regions in India, and then have those training institutions be trained to actually deliver these learnings and modules on how to actually conduct integrated landscape management. With the finance solutions design team, they're working in what they call accelerator landscapes. And when I say that, what I mean is they're working with these landscape partnerships to see how they can accelerate the flow of finance away from sectorially based, siloed, short-term projects and towards more inclusive, long-term integrated landscape investment portfolios. To do that requires actually a lot of financial transformation, because this just isn't how the current system works. So there's a major transformation component here, which is actually linked to how we want to scale all of these different activities up. So in the case of the landscape partnerships where the finance design team is working, they're actually working in 3 landscapes right now, one in Malawi, one in Vietnam, and one in Peru. These are what we call the accelerator landscapes. They're working directly with these landscape partnerships to develop integrated landscape investment portfolios. And then they're continuing that work with them to actually connect these portfolios and advertise these portfolios to the right financiers, funders, donors, and getting them to recognize the value of investing in an investment portfolio that's integrated rather than investing in sectoral projects. So that relationship and that management for each of those landscapes, super context specific, super challenging. The idea is that if we can prove this model in these 3 accelerator landscapes, it can then be scaled up and replicated by other institutions, organizations that are trying to do similar work. The last design team here I'll mention is the community catalyst, which I work a lot on. This is a design team that's trying to, at the appropriate scale, create networks and policy change and influencing that will actually support landscape partnerships at the appropriate scale. So in the early days of 1000 Landscapes, we had this idea that we would create a global action network where a landscape in Australia could share information with a landscape in Canada, and they could share tools and services. And really, we did a whole consultation phase where we found that that was not what local landscape leaders wanted. They wanted to work with other landscape partnerships in their own region to influence policies and share information that would be most relevant to them. So in response to that, in line with being driven by demand, we're actually piloting a project in Kenya where we're trying to create a coalition and empower this coalition of landscape partnerships in Kenya to form a network that would then influence national level policies. Kenya is kind of low-hanging fruit in this nature because they actually already have a government mandated practice and methodology for sort of doing this. So what I mean by that is each county, I think there's 70 something counties in Kenya, they each have, they just actually they elected a new president in Kenya. And with the shifting of power every every so often, they write new integrated county development plans. And so the goal here is actually to figure out how we can bring these different landscape partnerships across the whole country together to influence the enabling environment at that scale. And if we can find a replicable model there, how do we build that out across the rest of East Africa? If that works in East Africa, how do we replicate this process in Latin America and North America and Asia, et cetera? So everything that we're doing right now in this phase of 1000 Landscapes is to pilot and test directly with local landscape partnerships methods and models that we believe we can develop a proof of concept for that we can then scale all the way to 2030 and beyond. So this is the point of the initiative that we're in that requires a lot of close collaboration with these major NGOs, but most importantly with local community partners. And all of this is kind of harmonized and managed by what we call the Global Hub. That's where my role sits as the program coordinator of the initiative. That's where the steering committee of the initiative sits. This is where we do our fundraising. This is where we do our monitoring, evaluation, and learning, our communications. We have a whole team that focuses on that. We have a landscape leaders advisory group, which is actually currently 6 members of local representation embedded in our governance system that provides guidance for us. So right now we're really building the infrastructure and designing the tools and services that will actually position us to scale up. So while we're highly collaborative right now, our whole approach necessitates that we actually even scale up our collaboration even further, so that once that these tools and these services and these pathways and these infrastructures are built, we can disseminate, we can scale, we can mainstream and institutionalize in a really applied way, integrated landscape management, landscape partnerships, bioregionalism, whatever you might refer to it as the best pathway forward to achieving any of the sustainable development challenges that we have. So thanks for bearing with me through that presentation. I'll pause in a little bit for questions, but we have about 30 minutes left in this session. And I really wanted to explore with this group here today, the synergies and overlaps between bioregions and integrated landscape management. One of the challenges we face as an initiative is that there's all these different words, theories, processes that highlight the same concept. And there's a lot of competition between these groups. We don't want competition, we want collaboration. There's actually a great blog that I would encourage you to look at. It's actually literally called A Landscape by Any Other Name, which was written by Sarah Shear, who's the chair of the 1000 Landscapes for 1 billion people, and also the president and CEO of Eco Agriculture Partners. I'll link that in the chat in a moment. But after taking some questions, I would like to actually explore the questions of, how might we practice bioregionalism, for example, through integrated landscape management as kind of a process for scaling up bioregionalism, or as a process for just implementing and empowering local groups to actually enforce and conduct integrated approaches to land management on the ground, and how radical collaboration plays into that. So I can come back to this slide in a moment. I'll also share some contact information and everything, but for the time being, let me just pause there and take a little bit of time to answer some questions, or we can have some discussion amongst ourselves. So please just feel free to speak up or raise your hand.
Thanks so much, Tom. First of all, would you be willing to put that slide deck into our resources, or drop a link in the chat? So, because the contact information, for example, is in there. People can access that. And we have some questions in the chat too, but our call here is for radical collaboration, which I think Isabel might be curious to hear you speak to this too. One of the ways I see that is that we get beyond arguments about about theories of change and what we're supposed to do and who's right about this or that approach, and rather let that get sorted out, and that we work with where there's energy and alignment and life. And so, given that you've got, you're in this phase of piloting things, I'm curious to see if are you looking for more bioregions to work with, more landscape scale, integrated landscape scale groups to work with. We've got some represented right here in this room. Isabel, Edward, others, Trisha. So is that part of what you're here for?
Yeah, absolutely. So that is, we're a very ambitious initiative. In the early days, we had some grandiose plans that, by this point, we'd be working with 50 to 100 landscape partnerships really intimately. And I think indirectly, we actually do work with about 70 landscape partnerships, but we work really intimately, more so with about 20. And so there is a question of bandwidth here. So I know we have about we have dozens of organizations working on these things, but it really requires a lot of time and commitment and effort to participate in our calls and our work streams. Some people do it. We have about, I would say, 15 people working on 1,000 landscapes full time, and then about another 100 or so people working on 1,000 landscapes. Anywhere between 70 and 10% of their time, right? And so for new partnerships, we really just ask that they're kind of committed to this idea of co-design. At the local level, what we find, and one of the main challenges that we run into, is that based on just business as usual processes, a lot of local partnerships come to expect that there is a financial incentive to participate, which sometimes we can offer, but also a lot of these local partnerships are just so used to being prescribed certain methods to carry out. And we're not about prescribing, we're about actually working with local partnerships to influence us. And in turn, we can provide services in response to that, rather than providing those services right off the bat, right? And so if you have a need for training, that's fantastic. But instead of us just coming in and training, we would actually prefer that the local landscape partnership tell us what their training needs are, connect us to a local trainer and facilitator, and we work with them to actually do that training. So we're very open to partnership, but we like the scope of work to be really clear, and the commitments that we're making to one another to be really clear. So with that, if you are an organization, or if you're a representative at a local bioregion or a landscape partnership, by all means, reach out to me and we can discuss different ways for collaboration. Let me, sorry.
Three hands up there. I think it's Michelle, Isabel, and Edward in that order, probably.
Please. Michelle.
I'm from the Western Cape, the Berg Breda in South Africa, the bioregion here along the catchment. And I was interested because we in South Africa, we have already developed our spatial development plans across the country, our integrated development plans, not at a municipal level, but also the spatial, which is bioregion, all bioregionally based. Of course, the municipal doesn't overlap neatly. Only the one by the West Coast is overlapping. But then we've also sort of integrated quite a lot of like our biodiversity, a strategic plan for the nation, where we want to include our corridors, our protected areas, the core areas, and then the buffer zones, where we would also form the partnerships. But I think my question, what I'm sort of interested in, is how you're working in terms of not having this parallel, not a parallel process, so more in terms of the decision-making process. So how do we, in terms of working, that within that decision-making process, that we can assist, or we can be assisted to make the more, what are the more strategic, with all of these multiple layers, how do we make the strategic decision-making to collaborate, not only collaborate, but I think for us within the actual region, is how we're using these layers. So I wondered if you have any tools really on multi-criteria decision making, because that links the SDGs with the spatial planning, with the biodiversity prioritization, urban, rural. So I'm looking for kind of those very specific type tools that you might, have you developed them that we could perhaps have access to?
Yeah, so the 1000L initiative at this time does not have a tool that specifically responds to that. We probably will be developing a tool that responds to that most directly, probably in the form of learning modules that can provide guidance. At the same time, though, there's tools out there that already exist that I think will respond to the need that you just described, Michelle. And I would encourage you to actually, I'll link this in a moment in the chat, take a look at the practical guide, but also more importantly, take a look at our tool guide. So this is kind of the low hanging fruit that we're starting with as an initiative. Is I'll share this, but we have a whole inventory of tools that we've kind of explored across the partnership of 1000 Landscapes that responds to these different needs, and we're trying to make sense of them. So a lot of what we're doing right now, and I apologize for the glare in my screen. It's sun's coming up here in Colorado. What we're doing right now is a lot of sense making, and so we recognize that all these different organizations have developed tools and processes on their own, largely without aligning them with other organizations and processes. So we're starting at that point of trying to actually find where the existing tools are, how we can, if they're open source, just recommend that people use them, because why would we develop something new when it's already out there? And then at a certain point, we do want to actually be, if the players that develop these tools are in for collaboration, many of them are, some of them aren't, we can help them disseminate those tools and actually improve upon them, recognizing that the space is always changing and very iterative. So I hope that answers your question, Michelle. I'll share that document in the chat right now.
Thank you.
Isabel?
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to dig a bit deeper with you, Tom.
Yeah.
So I think people approach bioregioning in different ways. I mean, that's completely fine. It's probably important that that happens. But certainly the way that we're approaching it here in South Devon is that it's not just about landscape management. It's also about building relationships between business and community, or between policymakers and governance. It's kind of doing all that connective tissue piece. And to my mind, regenerative bioregions are empowered through learning processes to be able to make their own decisions about how to, in a sense, evolve and adapt faster than the pace of climate change. So it could be in any sphere of life. It could be in the sphere of regenerative agriculture, but it could be in the sphere of fishing. It could be in the sphere of income and work, or relief of poverty in urban areas. So we're trying to embrace the whole of a bioregion and not think so much about landscapes, knowing that biodiversity is obviously an important ingredient here, but we can't tackle everything. So I really wanted to kind of make that point that landscape management kind of sits within bioregions, and bioregions are the kind of embracing arm or the scale at which you work, within which there are generative relationships that connect everything together. But I also had a question about whether your model works for all landscapes, or do you work with each landscape to develop its own model?
So all of those questions, all of the above and both. But on your first point, landscape management certainly happens within a bioregion the same way landscape management happens within a landscape, the same way landscape management happens within a watershed or a jurisdiction. Like I said before, we're fine with whatever term you use. Integrated landscape management is kind of what we found to be across the board one of the more popular terms. Again, I would encourage you to look at a landscape by any other name blog that I think I shared in the chat already. But at its core, integrated landscape management is actually about relationship management and relationship development. That's why we put the partnership component in the center. From a systems change perspective, to your other point, Isabel, we have this tension a lot of time. This comes a lot from donors, right? A donor might be interested in climate change. Another donor might be interested in regenerative food systems or food systems transformation. That's all great. Our argument is that if you want to effectively create sustainable change in food systems transformation, for example, you need to take an integrated landscape management approach. And the second you prescribe from the top down as a donor, as an international organization, a more specific sort of focus of a project, if you are focused on fisheries, you are automatically kind of not, it's not taking a systems focused approach. You can take a systems focused approach to actually combat and solve problems that relate that happen in a seascape related to fisheries, for example. But by what I'm saying is that by actually taking an integrated landscape or seascape management approach, that is going to be the best solution to any number of problems. But if you're taking a fishery specific integrated landscape management approach, then it's not an integrated landscape management approach. It's not a bioregional approach because you're not actually considering the broader system of everything. So that's how we feel as 1000 Landscapes, is that whether your challenge is livelihoods, poverty reduction, climate change, carbon sequestration, adaptation, health, any of those challenges, the solution is going to be integrated landscape management from a systems transformation, a systems change perspective. So that's our thoughts on it. There's a lot of conflicting values and opinions about this. We try to be as inclusive as possible. We promote, instead of saying integrated landscape management, you could just say integrated bioregional management. We don't see the difference. We try not to get captured and bogged down too much in this idea about definitions and terminology. Rather, we just try to move forward and actually respond to the needs of local landscape partnerships, because that's what really matters. I hope that answers your question, Isabel. I'm sorry, I'm moving around here. Oh, go ahead.
Okay, good. Thank you, Tom. Glad to see the 1000 Landscapes progressing. I've been following you since a long time ago. Yeah, you mentioned several interesting issues. One about the commitment. So to be part of it, you have to commit. And one of the big questions is, how can you get that to happen when people that are on the ground are so busy? And sometimes the discussions in these networks really are not helping move forward. So one thing is, how do you guarantee that participation is actually co-creating joint solutions for different bioregions, exchanging experiences and things like that? Another thing I just wanted to mention is, in the University for International Cooperation, which I lead and founded 28 years ago, we moved into regeneration about 8 years ago, the whole university, and we're actually setting up something that could be very interesting to collaborate in. It's an educational hive. We started about 4 years ago with specific programs in regenerative entrepreneurship. And these are global programs. We have students from Africa, we have students from Asia, Latin America, even Europe and the US. But now what we're doing is launching this educational hive, which will be learning pathways for anybody who wants to do regeneration, because we don't have enough regenerators available. So there's more and more money becoming available for regeneration, but you can't find the people that know how to regenerate. And the idea is that anybody that wants to set up a course, any organization can do this. And so we'll have a very strong partnership at the global level for the online component. And then we're linking it to networks such as Regenerative Communities Network, where with mentorship, the students that are in this program can actually go and do regeneration projects around the world in the different bioregions. And through that, we expect to go creating more and more capacity around the world. So just to mention that, I'll look you up and we can talk further.
Yeah, no, please do. That sounds very interesting and relevant to what we're doing. I think just in maybe to bridge the gap there between that point and how to collaborate more, that probably fits best in what we call our capacity strengthening design team, which is led by Louise Buck, who's at EcoAg and also Cornell University, but we also co-lead this group with Common Land. For those of you who are familiar with Common Land and their 4 returns approach, we're working with them to develop this whole suite of learning modules. This educational hive sounds interesting. We're trying to develop this kind of network of trainers, more like a community of trainers, because we really see connections between them, more than just networking, but actually forming this kind of coalition and community of people that want to work together. So it's more community oriented than network oriented in that sense. That's the hope anyway. But that design team, led by Louise and Common Land, they're in the process right now of forming some advisory groups that actually is meant to bring in other learning materials, such as perhaps what you're working on, and embedding it within this broader process of integrated landscape management, integrated bioregional management. Recognizing that there's a lot of emphasis on regeneration right now, our point would be that, I'm sorry, am I still here? Can you all hear me?
Yeah, we hear you. You froze, but we hear you. Oh, maybe we don't hear you.
He's gone.
Well, that's interesting because he was also the host. No, he's still here on the call, but he just blocked out. Yeah, I don't think he made anyone co-host either, which is I can claim host if we need to. Special powers.
We can keep talking. We can keep talking even though he's not here.
Ken.
He might come back.
He might come back. Yeah.
Ben, is
We
anybody
have two hands up, so why don't, or should we wait until he comes back? I don't know, Claire, Nicolette, leave that up to either of you. Do you want to talk to the group or do you want to wait for Tom?
I don't mind talking because it's quite a quick sort of observation I wanted to make. To just introduce myself, I'm like and with Paul on the call, I live in Bath and I'm working in the Bristol Avon bioregion. And I was very keen to hear Isabel put the question to about
apologies all
bioregioning and integrated landscape thing, and I found there is a real tension between the two, and I think it's tension which I think Paul and I are beginning to feel as we're wanting to look beyond our immediate local town-based partnership. I should also say I sit on the Bathgate Landscape Partnership as well, and wanting to affect change at the level of the bioregion. And I think stems from the fact that the relationship aspect of bioregional, which is so important, and the trust building and the realigning of our relationships with each other and the land on which we live and which nurtures us, work best at a much smaller scale than they do at the sort of water catchment level. And however, some of the changes in the landscape which need to happen in order to regenerate faster than the biosphere changes have got to be sort of strategically managed at that bigger scale. So I think to some extent that it's a tension we've got to live with. I don't take the view that systemic change always is going to happen at that big landscape scale. I think very often you can have niches of change which, when the enabling conditions are right, will suddenly take off, and the bigger, the enveloping antagonistic forces away. And yeah, so I think what I would say, there are no easy answers, and everyone's got to be open to solutions emerging in all sorts of different ways with this problem.
Sorry, I cut out there for a moment. I think I caught the tail end of your question, Nicolette, and I think it was, it sounds like you added a lot of very useful context to the question anyway, but just to backtrack on this idea of relationship management, which I think is definitely key. I do want to emphasize that we feel the same way at 1000 Landscapes across the board. This idea of adaptive collaborative management is quite core to everything that we do and everything that we try to promote at the local bioregion or landscape level. And that, yes, you need to have those relationships in place before you can actually implement or jointly collaborate on any project. A lot of times, most of the time, actually, what you see is that projects move forward without having those relationships in place before that point, and that's why they don't often work out. So I mentioned this process framework several times now, and the landscape partnership being central to that and being the first thing that you set up before doing any of the joint visioning, joint planning, or whatever it might be, before that, there's actually a set of kind of tools and resources that we're working on what we would call core competencies for actually forming your landscape partnership, which requires that you have people that are dedicated to facilitating the partnership, people that are dedicated to coordinating the process. Actually, there's a really interesting quote that someone from Ecuador mentioned to me, one of our local landscape partnerships that we work with and support. He said that his landscape partnership would rather get $1,000 a month to coordinate their landscape partnership over 20 years rather than getting $20 million over 5 years. That just kind of goes to show how important just the idea of coordination is. So we see these multi-million-dollar projects that are super short term, and as a consequence, they're really these donors that give out these projects and money for these really specific projects don't work out, is because they're not emphasizing the long-term nature of something. They're not emphasizing the need for coordination. So that's one of the things that we're trying to do in the finance design team, is actually transform the way funders direct their money. In a lot of ways, landscapes are actually asking for less money, but over a longer period of time and for different purposes. So that's the coordination, the core competencies, not just around facilitation and coordination and convening, but also around inclusivity, gender diversity, inclusion. Those types of topics are really important to have in place before you even develop and make those relationships. So there's actually several steps before the actual relationship management and competencies that need to be in place for those relationships to be successful. So we talk about the enabling environment to implement something. You actually need an enabling environment to create the partnership. So there's actually tiers of enabling environments here that we're trying to catalyze. Sorry, go ahead.
I just wanted to build on that a bit more and actually allude back to the discussion which was in the previous session, which on regenerative business around regenerative finance as well. I think, yes, those relationships have got to be enabled and developed, but there also comes a time, if you're wanting to finance regeneration at sort of the big landscape scales, when you need some sort of collaborative structures or ways of governance which are conducive to getting that long is not necessarily tied up with particular measurable outputs at a certain period of time, but more in the growth of aligned relationships, etc. And that is where truly regenerative finance and governance is needed to make that happen.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. That's what we would call the landscape partnership, or the bioregional partnership, as being centered to everything. I know Claire has had their hand up for a long time, so I'll pass it over to them.
Thanks. Well, it may actually be crossing a lot into what Nicolette was asking. So having worked as a community artist, I have a background in organizations, arts administration. So what I noticed was that many organizations did not have their organizational development has been thoroughly neglected. I'm going to say the last 20 years have had so many cutbacks on, and this is in Canada, and I don't know how it is in the rest of the world, but I've just seen that the level of dysfunction in community-based organizations, and typically organizations that aren't able to get operation funding. So they're often working with volunteers. So you've got people, so I just see this huge amount of disseminated energy going out that is like spinning its wheels rather than being more effective. So that investment has just been neglected. The other part that I've noticed is that in any kind of reports, there's no recognition by the decision makers that dysfunction is even happening, which means they're not even evaluating properly what's going on. So just to me, there's these broken feedback loops of ignorance at that level. And then when you start bringing people together, they're just that aren't necessarily even organized into organizations. they're feeding into that dysfunction. Anyway, I guess my question is that I've seen this sort of breakdown where it feels to me that there needs to be just, I think you were bringing this up, Nicolette, the governance support, just very, very basic, you know, how do we make decisions together, accountability, evaluation, how do we say what we're going to do? Basically, how do we repair very broken feedback loops at a very basic level? Because no matter who the partnerships are that you're bringing together, they may have had more support. They may be more functional than the grassroots groups. But if the grassroots people are dysfunctional, to my mind, things like that level of dysfunction continues right throughout the whole system. So I just wanted to kind of really bring that up, because I realize working at a very grassroots level, it just drives me crazy. I see that, but I realize the people higher up in decision-making processes have no idea that that's how broken it is, that they have no idea that they don't know. Yeah,
thanks, Claire. And I share your frustration, as I think you mentioned you're in Canada and here in the US, where I think our level of dysfunction might be even more significant from that governance perspective. And just to say that, that's a really good point. So there's actually, I can share in the chat here, a recent paper on public policy to support landscape partnerships. Major thing that we're trying to do, and that's what we need. What's really interesting, and that some of the early findings, is that these governance structures are often stronger in supporting landscape partnerships in Indonesia and in Uganda, in much of Europe, than they are here in North America. If you notice in that map I shared, we don't work right now with any landscape partnerships, to my dismay, in the US or Canada, and that has not been for lack of trying. There's the Network for Landscape Conservation is here in the US. And to my earlier point, they do have a focus on conservation, which is great. You can focus on bioregions and landscapes through the lens of conservation. But and they work with the US government. The US government's getting better at this kind of whole of, they have a whole of government approach, which is, a pseudonym for a whole of landscape approach or a whole of bioregion. But yeah, there's some really natural challenges, Claire. I couldn't agree with you more that we do need governance structures that support grassroots movements. That's one of the things that we're trying to do with the Community Catalyst work stream. My vision, being someone here in the US who's really deeply embedded in trying to empower all of the local grassroots initiatives and efforts in my area. Here in Boulder, Colorado, there's tons of them. We're a very kind of passionate group of people, but there is a disconnect with the government mandates here. So I think we're going to be moving forward and trying to figure out ways to do this better, but it's going to take time. I'll share this paper, which you might find interesting, Claire, in the chat in a moment. And I direct that this is just our session. We're at time here. I'll stay online a little bit longer and keep answering questions, Ben, so that's all right. And I do think he looks like he's on the phone right now, but he did want to say a few words as well. But Ben, please, if you want to say anything, now's the chance.
Yeah, well, it was apropos because there are 2 other sessions that are starting right now in other rooms. So you're welcome to stay here. And Tom, I think I missed if you just said you have a little more time to. Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's wonderful. Thanks so much for that and for offering this. In the forest room, we've got Indigenous-led Community Land Trust session, and I think it's the island room. Is how can partnerships form tissue, with Ted Rao from Sociocracy for All. So if you want to make your way over to either of those sessions, you're welcome to do so, as well as to stay here. And hopefully this is just the beginning of a conversation. These little 1-hour sessions are a tease in many ways. And I love that you guys embrace the term radical collaboration. We just thought we made it up 3 months ago. Obviously, that's not close to being true. I'm not sure you made it up either, but I think part of it is that we we go through the challenges of staying connected and taking the time to explore things and setting aside perhaps preconceptions and judgments and trying to just understand something a little better and see where things can go. And it certainly seems there's enormous potential for radical collaboration in, between the work that you're doing and the work that so many people showing up for this summit are involved in. So thank you so much for that. I will leave you because I'm going to go support my friends from Sociocracy for All. So you'll be the host in the session, and I think the recording will just continue. And you're welcome to stay as long as you like, I think, in this room.
Okay. Well, thanks, Ben. It's been a pleasure, and please feel free, obviously, like Ben just said, to hop around. I'll stick around until no one's left. Michael, from the Potomac watershed, which I'm familiar with very well.
Woohoo! Land of the Piscataway people. Well, at least the northern side of the river. Thank you. And I have been struggling with a certain set of assumptions and language hidden in plain sight that I'm trying to become more skillful about. And I was going to try and describe them, and you could either help say, oh no, I think you're misunderstanding in the following way, or whatever reaction you have. But basically, one of the core things is about everybody talks collaboration, and as if it was the same thing in many different kind of circumstances, and in order to get things done, there's getting things done where there's an agreement. Here's part of the tension of what a different way of coming at it. Dating versus being in a marriage are two different ways of being, being in action. And it's very easy to be very promiscuous about going to many different things versus entering into a relationship where it's like, okay, we're committed and we're going to work through the difficulties of what there is to work in. And often when one enters into a marriage, there's other people that are not in that marriage. And so this is another one of the tensions about who is in the relationship and what are they doing? Because collaborations that are kind of, everybody in an orgy of is one thing, but to actually then commit and co-organize to co-parent some idea into existence is a very different form of play. And so I sometimes find that the language that we have about some of these things enable some people who are really players to not co-parent but play. And it's really kind of trying to invite folks into how do we sophisticate, ourselves and our relationships so that we're moving in the direction of our dreams together through the breakdowns and the breakthroughs that arise when we're in a marriage, and sometimes things are sunny and sometimes things are not.
Yeah, no, totally.
Sorry, that my question killed it.
No, I understand the gist of what you're saying, and so I keep on talking about these local level multi-stakeholder partnerships, these coalitions. We're actually talking about multiple things when we talk about collaboration, because we're talking about collaboration, of course, as us, for example, as 1,000 Landscapes for Unveiling People. There's the collaboration across these major local and international institutions. Mm-hmm. And then there's the collaborations that we try to empower that take place on the ground, right? In a lot of ways, the way we've set up 1,000 Landscapes as a radical collaboration replicates what we see as a strong multi-stakeholder landscape partnership coalition on the ground. Mm-hmm. So we try to operate like a local landscape partnership at this scale. And so we practiced a lot of the same values: adaptive, collaborative management, inclusivity. We need coordination. So I think, to answer your question more directly, it's really easy to have it's not easy. it's actually very difficult, but it's easier to have a bilateral relationship than it is to have a multilateral relationship. Mm-hmm. So the way we set up 1000 Landscapes is Eco Agriculture Partners is responsible for the coordination, the convening. So we manage a lot of bilateral relationships because that's how relationships kind of take shape from a legal perspective. Actually, it's how the system is set up. So for example, if we're transferring funds, you don't transfer funds between multiple organizations to one organization. You transfer funds between one organization to one organization. EcoAg takes care of that. But at the same time, agreements, because 1000 Landscapes isn't a legal entity, the same way a lot of these local landscape partnerships are not legal entities. So 1000 Landscapes doesn't go into a partnership with another organization. Eco Agriculture Partners, as an organization, as the convening organization of 1000 Landscapes, goes into partnership with an organization on behalf of the entire 1000L coalition. So that's kind of how we structure it from a legal perspective, which honestly isn't how I would like to do it because it's not super inclusive, but that's just the legal system that we're like kind of stuck in. That's the same sort of legal system that local on the ground partnerships are stuck in. So to give you an example here, one of the disparities that we often see is a donor. So let's say there's this really progressive donor that wants to invest in multiple long-term projects within a landscape. To actually do that still requires, if they're going to fund that funding go to one organization. And then if they are funding multiple organizations, how do you coordinate that funding? So one of the challenges we're facing right now, carbon's really big, right? So there's like RED Plus programs, carbon credit schemes. There's different programs and models of this happening all over the world, whether you agree with them or not. But a model here is that someone coordinates a carbon project that generates funding that a company pays for. The company then takes that funding and puts it back into the landscape. So one model we actually found for this was that a company, I don't know, I won't say names, was basically giving the money that they generated through the carbon project to a local civil society organization in that landscape. The civil society organization was then requesting proposals from different organizations to actually request that money for projects. That process was creating competition, not collaboration. So that's really the problem when it comes to participation, is how do we move away from these competitive mentalities, which is very business as usual, into collaborative mentalities, which really almost always comes from the top down. And I'm not saying there's solutions for this, because there really aren't at the time. But in the case of like, it happens at all levels. You see requests for proposals, you see different sort of things that incentivize people to actually try to be really guardian of what they have and not share that externally. So, I mean, in the case of this carbon credit scheme, how could, instead of that company giving that money to one organization to then divvy out to the rest of the organizations, you need to develop an infrastructure. And to get back to some earlier conversations, having the partnership in place and having it set up where you can actually have coordinated investments go in a really transparent way. Transparency is key here, because even if you have a request for proposals that isn't transparent, that's going to mean that like no one knows who's getting what. People are guarding, what they're doing. That's going to create competition instead of collaboration. So developing local level models that are inclusive and transparent, that gives top-down entities who have to be willing to do this the power to then invest in those organizations that are legally ambiguous, to then decide what they want to do with those funds. Those are the challenges we face at the local level that we also face here at the highest level of, because we have the same problem all the time. Like, we have one donor, for example, that gave to the 1000 Landscapes initiative. That money gets divvied out across the partnership. It's not often in the most transparent way. That's not our fault. That's the donor's fault. Mm-hmm. So developing strategies around that is really challenging. I don't know if that answered your question. We've actually used the marriage analogy a lot, so it's very relevant.
I decided to come back then.
Hey, Ben.
Big room.
I think we're just trying to.
They're doing introductions. It's going to take half an hour, and then I saw there's only a few people here. This is cool.
No, I felt bad for not doing more introductions at the start here, but I knew it would have taken forever, so I kind of just jumped into it.
Do you want to keep the recording going? Does that make sense?
That's
sorry,
fine.
please.
Yeah.
Well, it is going.
Whatever.
I'm just curious if you wanted to.
I forgot the recording was going on, so I was.
Hey, Michael.
Hi, Ben. I have to ask you a question offline about something that you came to mind recently. Somebody was looking for something, but here's one of the things that, Tom, for me is so I've been grappling with this question of collective learning, and whether it can become, at what point does something form into a learning entity, so that it then, and money seems to be the proxy for that without there being a financial exchange of some kind, that there's not a learning unit, if you will. And there are places and spaces in the world that non-financialized learning has been occurring collectively and occurred as movements, and how to extend those in ways that are positive. Here's where maybe the recording should be running, but a journey that I started 30 years ago.
It is running.
Was still
going. We never turned it off.
It's okay. Sorry, I have my window open and a motorcycle just went by. Was a transformational, personal transformational change that then stepped into community, and it was recovery. I had a addicted relationship to certain ideas and substances, and I stepped into community and learned new ways of thinking about those, and then kind of went through a process of renegotiating a series of behaviors and a series of relationships in my life to no longer be in that relationship to what was the subject of my maladaptive behavior, shall we call it. And so community helped me make adaptations that I could not get alone. And I'm a big fan of how, when somebody goes through a transformative learning experience, that it is peer learning that supports all the ways in which that transformation has to emerge and unfold. And that the movement of co-facilitating the transformation in the world, whether we are maladapted to a substance, whether we're maladapted to our relationship to the land, whether we're maladapted, is always this kind of more and more, starts as personal, but then it is a co-regulated phenomenon. And whether that co-regulation occurs in peer groups, whether it occurs in however it arises, that it is it's a learning journey that involves first seeing a bigger picture, then getting related to that bigger picture, and then renegotiating a whole series of things within one's life and between groups that assimilate the new level of visibility that one did not have previously. And so it's a learning journey, both individually. Here's the diagram that I tend to use. First it starts with me, then it starts with we, and then and that's a oversimplified fractal, but it's a metaphor for this kind of changing one's and adapting one's relation to the ecosystem in which one is in.
Yeah. Well, I think to me just using your diagram there as an example, the question that comes to mind is how might we create the we? Mm-hmm. And to me, it's a lot of it has to do with framing in the narrative. So example would be a lot of organizations, institutions, donors are really passionate about supporting farmers. They want to using their own language, small scale peasant farmers, things like that is super common. Mm-hmm. We shouldn't be viewing farmers as purely just people that produce food. Farmers are land managers. Mm-hmm. So you have to find the commonality across the board. In the case of landscape management, land is literally the commonality that everyone has. So instead of thinking about someone as a fisherman, think about them as a land manager. Instead of thinking about them as a government employee, they're a land manager. Instead of thinking about them as a community artist, you're a land manager. That's the commonality that you have. And I think for learning to happen in a non-financialized way, like you described, because I think learning in a non-financialized space is the most genuine form of learning. It has to happen at the appropriate scale. And so if you're thinking about everyone as a land manager, a bioregional manager, whatever it might be, and you're framing the narrative in that way, and everyone kind of agrees to that, and they see themselves, I'm not just someone that produces, I don't just grow beets. I manage the land to grow beets. And to do that successfully, I need to actually have partnerships with other people that manage watersheds, that empower pollinators to pollinate my plants, that kind of thing. So it's getting people to actually connect to the system in ways that resonates with them. And then they're going to be more motivated to actually collectively learn with one another. But that only happens once you actually frame the question and frame the challenge in the way that resonates with a critical mass of people at the appropriate scale. So I don't think learning actually happens globally. I don't think learning actually even happens regionally. It has to happen, I think, at the biggest possible forum in a national level or in a subnational level is where we see learning happening. Because that's when you think about shared learning, people need to have commonalities with one another. So someone in one continent probably doesn't have a lot to share with someone in another continent, maybe at this scale, but not at like the local level scale. But yeah, that's how I think about it. And framing is quintessentially a lot of what we do. I spent a lot of this last hour trying to frame the conversation just so that we could actually be in a place to actually have mutually beneficial conversations and not talk about what the difference between a landscape and a bioregional is, because at the end of the day, that doesn't really matter.
Something, by the way, within the learning journey might be useful, might not be. Happiness. We culturally have been conditioned the pursuit of happiness is an individual blah, 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 right? Especially that. And that the science of well-being has begun to detect that that our flourishing long-term life-wise is better predicted by our relationships, and up to 3 degrees of separation, the quality of those relationships. So not just the ones we're directly managing, but the ones that are, so that it kind of makes this relational point. And that that is in fact much more influential on our experience of aliveness and well-being. And so to become more competent at this co-regulating the next degree and the next degree is for me kind of the basis for entering into a we when I've been a me, more offering that thought. And that for a whole different level of a learning journey, the idea of what can the landscape teach us about, to use this silly example, I was having a little breakdown with somebody I was talking to earlier today, a Lakota elder who I was regarding as a mentor, and I was pissed with him about something, and he was like, "Mike, I'm not the source of wisdom. I go to nature whenever I need to find my answers." And I started going more to a local park and walking barefoot. Why am I emphasizing the barefoot? Because by stripping out a way that I had been in relationship to the land, I started picking up more stuff that I wasn't aware I wasn't picking up. So all of this is about the learning journey. Like all of a sudden I could feel through my feet the different, this is pummeled land, and this is fresh, vibrant, spongy land. And all of a sudden had a way of being in connection to that I didn't realize I wasn't connected because I've been wearing shoes my whole life. And so again, I'm just using this learning metaphor as a kind of new ways to sense and expand and enrich the experience of being, a spiritual journey of opening up more and more fully into life. And I know that's a hard sell to make sometimes, like, what the heck? But
well, I mean, no, not necessarily. I think it's what I take it from that example is that, learning happens in different ways for different people. I mean, on the flip side of the narrative, there's a lot of people that have been walking barefoot their entire lives out of not having shoes.
Right. That's a good point.
I mean, the idea is like how to bridge those gaps. And especially at the local level is like, so when we talk about, I mentioned earlier that we see more effective landscape partnerships in Africa than we do in North America. I completely believe that, just because they have a necessity to work with one another more so than people in North America have a necessity to work with one another, because they're not as comfortable in much of the cases. And so they actually, collaboration happens more out of necessity. Collaboration isn't super effective in my community, for example, not because people aren't passionate, but because people are comfortable.
There's a cultural difference too, don't you think? We're so big on individualism here. Ubuntu is an idea of collectivism.
Yeah.
You know.
No, absolutely. I mean, as far as joint learning goes, I mean, I can talk a little bit about, I have for me, it's tricky just because I focus so much on the international scene so much. I get disconnected from my local place. I love my local place, but I experience it mostly as an individual. I don't experience it as effectively with different community members. When I do, it's mostly to like at a bar or out hiking or something. It's not to talk about issues. We're all of us just have these jobs where we're thinking about issues all the time, but usually not in the places where we live. But at the same time, we have a lot of challenges. I mean, I live in a place that's being on an annual basis, infrastructure and forests are being destroyed by fires. We have floods, we have drought, we have all sorts of overlapping challenges, but we also have mechanisms to overcome those just out of financial well-being by and large. And so it's like, okay, I understand fire is a problem, but when it comes down to it, even if it burns down my house, I can just buy a new house. That's, you know, there was here in Boulder County last Christmas, 1,000 houses burned down. We're basically over that. It's not to say that like people aren't traumatized and scarred by it, but they had the financial means to just be like, and the government support to overcome that problem. So it's like, what's really the incentive for a lot of people to overcome these problems? You know, I lived in DC just a couple of years ago in Alexandria along the Potomac, and I lived in a now gentrified area that is getting flooded all the time because the infrastructure hadn't been built there.
Yes,
you know, flooding happens, but at the end of the day, and people are protesting about it and doing things about it, but they're not really getting organized to do anything about it. They're just more or less they're voting. That's their mechanism for trying to create change. And so we have infrastructures and methods in place to actually create change that other places don't, which is both good and bad, right? I think we need a combination of both, because I think the flip side of this in Uganda, for example, would be that like why they do have strong community-based coalitions, they don't have a mechanism to vote to create top-down policy change. They only have a mechanism to create bottom-up policy change based on their local community constructs. So,
of course, you know, many would argue here, me included, that our ability to create the change we need through voting is pretty compromised too. I mean, even if you know, I mean, for example, look at industrial agriculture, right, and how embedded that is in our political system and the philanthro-industrial complex, for that matter. And so it's, you know, which leads me to something I'd love to shift the conversation to, you know, back to 1,000 Landscapes and the work that you're doing. There was a comment early on from John Thakura. I don't know if you.
No, I'll have to go in the chat and look at all those comments.
You have to go look. There's a lot of interesting stuff in there.
I'm sure there is.
You know, he's somebody was one of the early framers of the whole concept of bioregioning. He's connected more to Isabel Carlisle, our co-convener, than I am, but you know, he looks at your list of partners and says, wow, you know, this is the establishment, right? This is the old paradigm here.
Yeah.
And so people that are steeped in the idea of deep systemic transformation come at, you know, just from the surface, look at what you're doing and are hugely skeptical. And I think a lot of the questions you were getting, you know, it struck me that people weren't always actually hearing what you were saying, or maybe they just weren't believing it. You know, like, do you really want to collaborate with and listen to the people in the landscape and be guided by that? Or are you coming in with top-down imposed models? And you're very clearly saying it's the former, and yet there's this skepticism, right? So I guess I'm curious what you say to that, but also more fundamentally, you know, how do you see the 1,000 Landscapes positioned in terms of, say, the Three Horizons model, which I'm familiar with, you know, the idea, you know, it strikes me that you're in H2 plus kind of a territory, because you're working with all of these groups that are going to be you know, they're going to accept, for example, exponential growth as something, of course, that we must have, you know, otherwise our economy collapses and all these degrowth people are insane. Or that a financially based approach to transformation can work, because regenerating the land is, you know, can be profitable when we do it the right way. And so we can drive the change we need through market-based mechanisms to a very large degree, as two examples. So I'm just curious sort of how you see what you're doing as being positioned and what you might say to those critics. And then I have a second question too, but I'd love to hear that one. Your thoughts. Yeah,
well, on the skepticism bit, skepticism is healthy, it's natural, it's welcome in a lot of ways. It's not always helpful, but it's understandable. I'm skeptical of our partners within 1000 Landscapes. It'd be weird if I wasn't. And by and large, when I'm speaking now, I mean, I have the staff title that's most connected to 1000 Landscapes out of anyone in 1000 Landscapes. So my role more than anyone else is to see the health of the initiative go forth and thrive. And so, you know, I speak as well as I can and as eloquently as I can on behalf of all the partners of 1000 Landscapes. But at the end of the day, I'm an employee of Eco Agriculture Partners. And a lot of what we do is, you know, I'm speaking more so on the behalf of my personal beliefs of where I think we can go and where Eco Agriculture believes we can drive this initiative as a primary convening body and coordinating body of the initiative. So I'm skeptical all the time. I mean, we work with major, Eco Ag is a small organization that works with these major players. I mean, UNDP is a core partner of 1000 Landscapes. Tons of skepticism of all the different, you know, there's some great programs in the UN system. There's some really bad programs in the UN system. They'll be the first to address that. And, you know, there's Rainforest Alliance, Conservation International, these different organizations have, you know, they work in a lot of different collaborations and partnerships as well. 1000 Landscapes being one of many of them. What we try to practice as a collection of partners within 1000L is to leave our egos kind of at the doorstep. That doesn't mean leaving our logos and the other work that we're doing behind. It just means coming into 1000 Landscapes in a good faith effort to try to drive this forward. Having worked pretty extensively with both, you know, high-level people in these organizations and low-level people, there's broad recognition that integrated landscape management as a model, bioregionalism as a model, is the best pathway forward. That's not really what we're debating right now. What we're actually debating is how it can actually be implemented and how we can get away from the systems that have more or less funded our work for decades. In the case of a lot of organizations, certification, Carbon Red Plus programs have been the driving force that have not only generated funding for nonprofit civil society type organizations, but more importantly, also businesses that partner with these organizations. Getting away from those mentalities is difficult, and we're right to be skeptical by them. I don't know how you change that overnight in any other way than from the bottom up to like, that's essentially what we're trying to do, is by getting a critical mass of landscape partnerships that are coming together and say, this is the way forward. You can go with the other way you've been doing things business as usual. It's just not going to work. And that's recognized, at least in the public sector. I won't speak for the private sector. That's not my specialty, but that's why when we talk about transformation and catalyzing transformation, we talk about it from the bottom up, mostly to influence the top down, not vice versa, because vice versa hasn't worked. Top down influencing the bottom up is already the predominating narrative, and it just doesn't work. So yeah, skepticism is natural. It's going to happen. I'm skeptical of everything that we do. When I first took on this role, I was attracted to it by its ambition. It's audacity, really. It's more than an ambition. But at the same time, I don't know what other pathway forward is there.
Right.
So skepticism is good as long as someone's offering a solution or something different. And that's what bothers me about skepticism, is it's skepticism that doesn't offer anything else along with it.
Right. If it's pure sort of cynicism and resignation, that's
right.
completely
It's cynicism,
toxic,
not skepticism.
Yeah. Whereas, but I think this is coming more from a question of just, how transformation, you're using the right words. We like these words, but are you using these words in the way that that they mean the level of transformational change that, that we believe is needed? Or is it, for lack of a better term, greenwashing, right? That's the big fear. And there's this question, well, can we trust these guys? Look at who they're working with and all. And at the same time, well, you have money and we need money.
We don't have money. I'll snip.
Oh, you don't?
Okay. No, of course not.
but the appearance,
who's going to,
donor, these guys may have some funding that others have had struggled to get.
I understand that perception, but I mean, at the same time, look at this from the lens of a donor, and, the skepticism that this group has, for example, wanes in comparison to the skepticism of most donors.
Right.
So, I mean, this is why in my speech, I just talked about, I talk about the coalition of partners, which is more attractive to a donor audience than it is to this audience. I understand, but that's why I tried to, but what I'm trying to say is I emphasize the local landscape partnerships as being the drivers that we're getting demand from far more than the organizations. Organizations are just landscape and bioregional supporters and developers. They don't make the decisions in this space.
Well, that's the key, right? Who has actual decision-making authority? So it's one thing to consult with people on the ground and get their input, but then, take that up to a higher level and in a closed room, make a decision versus saying, actually, we're going to try to, move the decision-making power as close to the land and the stewards of that land as we can. Right.
Well, they do make the decisions when it comes to their own. We're not working in their landscapes. They're working in their landscapes. They make the decisions for implementing the projects that they want to. We're giving them tools.
The funding decisions, right? Part of
we don't fund them. That solves that problem.
So am I wrong in thinking that 1,000 Landscapes has the ambition of actually funding work on the ground? That you're part of what you want to do is be a conduit?
We want to direct funding to work on the ground, but by and large, we don't directly fund it. We indirectly. So, for example, we reckon it would never work if 1,000 Landscapes was going to say, we have a pool of $10 million. We're going to give 500,000 to 20 landscapes. That wouldn't work because the funding would be coming from the wrong source. It needs to be generated by the landscape partnership themselves. And to generate that funding from the landscape partnership themselves, they need to have an integrated landscape investment portfolio of projects that are interlinked across the landscape that banks, investors, financiers, private sector, public sector funding recognizes is going to be sufficient. And also, more importantly, $500,000 per landscape, even over 10 years, isn't enough money.
It's a drop in the bucket. But let me understand the model a little bit better then. So you've got a portfolio of projects, and are you at least funding the capacity building to develop that portfolio and be able to present it?
We don't have a portfolio project. We have work streams.
I'm saying the landscapes develop a portfolio.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I heard you say, right?
Yeah.
So that's the model, is that they are developing, they have a many, so question one is, are you giving them capacity building support in that, including some funding for the work involved in that?
Yeah, absolutely. It goes beyond capacity building support, because capacity is one thing. We do that, but that's kind of like the lowest hanging fruit. We can provide, I mentioned these learning modules that we're developing. We can train someone and provide guidance on how to implement integrated landscape management. We want to empower landscape partnerships far more than just raising their capacity.
Okay, so another way of saying that might be that you want to give them support to actually develop the projects that are fundable.
That's part of it. Yeah, certainly. But developing the portfolio of projects.
Right. So now Landscape X, Guyana, whatever, has a portfolio of projects. Okay. They've gotten to that point. What's the role of 1,000 Landscapes at that point in terms of those projects getting funded? And are those projects, is this blended capital? It's going to depend on the landscape, I assume, but is the assumption that there might be all different kinds of funding, and you're trying to support an integrated approach to that as well? And so then what happens next?
Yeah. So, from a financial perspective, this is what the finance design team is doing with our accelerator, the landscapes we refer to as these accelerator landscapes. Not only do we develop this portfolio, but it's connecting that portfolio to investors. And that, by and large, actually requires strong developing relationships with those local banks, national banks, international banks, different organizations, business, whatever it might be, public sector funding, to get them to invest in these projects. That's just one tier of what we do, though. From the financial component, there's, we're providing this direct capacity support in these to actually implement integrated landscape management, but also not just building those competencies to do ILM, but building competencies around facilitation, coordination, that type of thing. Landscape partnerships will decide what their projects are, but as I was trying to emphasize in the point, it's having a portfolio of projects and getting money for those projects still isn't a winning solution. You need money to coordinate those projects. That's really the missing component for a lot of this. So within an integrated landscape investment portfolio, that should be like the top line of a budget is project
and who's funding that?
It would be the same people that are funding the projects. So really what we're trying to do is
okay. So are the banks, let's say you got 20 banks that are interested and 10, individual angel investors and 10 philanthropists that are all interested in this one region. Is that kind of, you're looking to somehow create an ecosystem that can integrate their interests with the interests of the landscape in a coordinated and systemic way? Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, that's part of it, but you have to demonstrate reduced risk because that's how financiers view the picture, right? So why, from a risk reduction standpoint, in their investment, why would they invest in this if they perceive it to be highly risky? And it would be risky because there isn't any existing model for investors investing in coordination and convening aspects of any project. So we're trying to reduce risk by having that portfolio and also demonstrating that for this portfolio to be successful, you need to invest in it over like a 10, 20-year period. And you need to invest in that coordination. That in it of itself will reduce the risk, but it is a little bit of it's definitely a chicken or the egg situation because we're trying to develop models that get recognition that are being low risk investments.
Although I guess that comes to the point of this question of how transformational is this? Because some might argue, I have and recently, that actually the current financial systems paradigm of risk and return needing to coordinate is not going to be sufficient to drive the level of transformation we need. That actually we need investors that are willing to accept lower returns and higher risk and longer term payouts in order to get where we need to go. Otherwise, we won't be able to move enough capital. If we're trying to compete against the existing business as usual system that extracts all kinds of stuff to provide high short-term returns with relatively little risk, we're going to lose that battle over and over again if we're just trying to have a bank or an investor go where the money is going to be.
Yeah, well, I mean that I'm talking about primarily the bottom-up local level model right now. There's a broader systems change level that we try to address as well and we hope to in the scaling phase. We're developing a series of like donor webinars right now, essentially to get donors to recognize and investors to recognize the need for integrated landscape management. We actually had one of our funders is Lauditz Foundation. Lauditz Foundation gets their money from, it's a family foundation for European fashion company, textiles. And they have an interest. I mean, they have a business interest naturally, like so many donors do, because that's where they get their billions of dollars. They recognize from a systems change component, we need to transform how the private sector actually views these things. So we organized, this was a while ago now, at the end of last year, maybe an executive roundtable with executives from major businesses in how they should be looking at investments and how they should be for those that generate their profits off of exploiting landscapes or exploiting natural resources in the landscapes, shifting the paradigm to more integrated model. They understand these things. They recognize the need for them. So, I mean, we can have these conversations at that high level, and that's going to take a lot of time. Transformation, I mean, as much as this is kind of an ongoing debate within some of us at 1000 Landscapes. Does transformation happen immediately or does it happen over the long term? Because by definition, like radical transformation happens immediately. that's what makes it radical.
Well, things aren't always linear, so we don't know. But
well,
so,
I mean, you can say that like for that radical transformation tipping point to happen, there's a lot of things building up to it, but those aren't documented. And that's what people want to see documented, but those are inherently undocumentable.
Yes, absolutely. And of course,
what may be missing is better vocabulary for the shift from the moment in the hero's journey. And I know a lot of people vilify it these days, but there's this circular process where one goes, takes on a series of challenges, has a moment of revelation, or the death of the self, or the resurrection, whatever you want. But that's only halfway through the journey. The rest of the journey is then, how does one integrate the new revelation? How does one build skills and talent, and then bring the elixir of the gods, the gift, the insight back to community? And in addiction, you could say the moment of revelation is, I've got a problem. Then there is the acquisition of new vocabulary, the development of new behaviors, the co-regulation with others, the renegotiation in the world of entering into different partnerships, if you will, whether it's within the family, with the workplace, whatever, and beginning to evolve to a different place of being. And so there are, if you will, indicators, whether it's the personal journey or whether it's inter-organizational journeys. And by the way, investors at the moment are just comfortable with investing. And I say this, like last 2 years ago, I was having a fuss at USAID where the person running the bureau was investing all in what I call autumn type projects, the things that are all sprouting fruit. And it's like, yeah, but you have to have spring, and you have to have the investment in the pipeline to produce the fruit at the end of the process. And he was being advised by Wall Street types, and he he was not interested in all these kind of capacity building, as we're calling them here, but maybe need better language. So that it's like, yeah, it's not just any capacity. There are ways in which you have the moment of revelation, you have the certain kind of activities that go into emerging new, whether it is at the personal, the interpersonal, or in relationship to nature. There is a pattern that can be looked at more carefully and tracked as it's evolving over time, and that the investors can be a little more courageous, and that the people doing the work can demand from investors what it is that no, we don't want this relationship with you. We are co-negotiating what it is that we want your money for. I know I kind of jumped in there, but I just think that there's a learning journey here that's much more actionable. That, by the way, is what I teach. That's why I'm kind of a little, the negotiation of collective agreements in order to then dream together and venture together. That is much more repeatable than we sometimes think it is. So sorry. I'm going to put myself back on mute and just say I just feel so grateful to be witnessing this whole exchange.
Well, yeah, and to your point, Michael, I think there are indicators. This conversation is an indicator that transformation is happening, albeit quite slowly. There's indicators that, I mean, the 1,000 Landscapes for 1 billion people has funding. That's an indicator of these things happening. So it's not like there's signs of these things happening. They're just not significant enough. And we're always trying to get more investors into this, and donors to put money forth. We don't have a problem attracting partners. We have a problem attracting serious money. So yeah, I mean, to me, it would be, it could very well happen that like we don't get the funding to move on into the next phase. And that would be ironic, given that you talk to donors, you talk to partners, they all believe in what we're doing. We're so entrenched in these other models. So that would be the real sort of tragedy. And I think it's happened before, right? I don't know if we're the first kind of major global initiative to try to put forward this model for sustainable development. I'm sure others have tried, and I think we're getting further down the line, so that's a good indicator. But at the same time, there's still risk at play, and we're running out of time. I'm not as doom and gloomy as a lot of other folks. I think by and large we'll be fine. I know a lot of people don't share that sentiment, but people are resilient, and things could be a lot worse. Things are definitely not going great, but by and large, like the simple fact that these processes are moving forward, that they're generating momentum, that people are talking about them, that donors are recognizing their value, shows that at least we're semi on the right path. And I think as a global population, like the global population is, the majority of us are there. It's really, that's not where the power lies though, right? So it's how do we get that bottom up that does recognize that this is the way forward to actually invest in this.
That's the trick. And especially because I think what I'm hearing you name is, the structures that can coordinate systemically so that we get out of this project to project, funder to funder transactional relationship are essential. And those things we really don't have a business model for at this point. Yes, you could say collectively we're reducing risk by doing this because it's less risky if we have a thriving landscape. And, from an investor standpoint and even a funder standpoint, that's often not, that still doesn't, there's a leap for them to make there. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
I want to thank you. I'm sorry, I'm jumping in. I want to thank you. I'm going to be rolling off, but before I do, something that you wonder, that's what you got out of this? I got a lot out of this, but something you said much earlier in the conversation about how comfort drives disconnection, and how people don't, because in the West we're safe, so we don't have to act.
Right. And we're entitled to safety and comfort.
Entitled, all privileged, all these. But you said it in a way that I saw some new things for myself, and I'm living the journey of relating to discomfort and transcending our blind spots. That's my transformational learning, if you will. And you really helped me see something that I couldn't see previously. So I didn't expect to get that. There were a lot of other things I learned, and it was interesting to listen to you. But I wanted to thank you because one drop landed.
No, great. That's fantastic. And I appreciate it. Yeah, hopefully our paths cross again and we can continue the conversation. I do need to hop off pretty soon as well, but thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
Yeah. And Ben, thanks for the opportunity for having these conversations. I hope it continues, and gonna continue.
I know there was energy to continue it with some people that couldn't stay beyond the hour. That I'd love to see you stay, be in dialogue with further, particularly some of the folks that are already, that don't need to be introduced to the theory of change that you spoke to, right? That have been practicing it in different ways for some time, that are and that maybe are still just learning about what 1,000 Landscapes is doing, and are trying to understand, is there value in collaborating? Where does that happen? How does that serve you? How does that serve them?
Yeah, totally. And I can add, I'll add the PowerPoint to the page, and some more language. I haven't done that. But yeah, and then I'll try to be joining some more sessions, and I can keep advertising and making myself available for follow-ups and that kind of thing. That's my job. So yeah.
It's very compelling, by the way. Even if I completely took something out of left field in a different place, it looks very A-game.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, well, there's a lot of different entry points for interest and participation. We just need to leverage them in ways that are mutually beneficial. But yeah,
the skill and the care and the thinking and the pace at which you develop this really comes through. You didn't just throw something against the wall because you knew in your heart it was right, and just hope people beat a path to your door. That you've been building this.
There's a little bit of that, but yeah. No, and just to say that we're really upscaling right now our our website with a lot more information. I know it's still very bare bones, and that's intentionally because we're figuring things out. But yeah, just to give you some insight here, Ben, we're going to be, we're developing these tools mostly behind closed doors, but we're going to be kind of scaling them up and making them more publicly available and transparent. And that should be conveyed on the website. So as long as you're kind of staying tuned to that, the hypothesis is as we kind of roll things out, it's going to incentivize participation even more. It's going to open doors for participation that haven't been opened yet, just because we haven't been in a position to do it and people haven't seen the value. So
no, that makes sense.
Yeah.
That's part of the I think that I'm sensing is, Yeah. All right. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much. I'm going to close the room, I think.
Bye-bye.
To do that.
Thanks.
Yeah.